It was one of those quiet mornings when sunlight crept gently through the tall windows of Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom. The kind of peaceful start that promised an ordinary day of small parking violations and simple misunderstandings. But destiny had other plans that morning. What began as an ordinary session would soon turn into one of the most unforgettable trials in Judge Caprio's long and noble career. A moment that would remind the world that no amount of fame or fortune can place you above human decency. The courtroom doors opened. The echo of heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, turning every head in the room. And when the figure stepped inside, an almost tangible silence fell. People whispered, jaws dropped. Because walking into that modest Rhode Island courtroom was none other than Willow Smith, daughter of Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, part of one of Hollywood's most powerful families. She didn't walk in like a defendant. She walked in like a celebrity on a red carpet. Every step slow, deliberate, dripping with confidence and entitlement. From her Balenciaga heels to the diamond studs that caught every glint of light, she was a walking billboard of privilege. The courtroom wasn't used to glitter. It was used to truth. And today, those two things were about to collide. Behind her came three attorneys. Not one or two, three. The kind of high-priced legal defense that could drain a small business dry in a week. They whispered among themselves as if the entire proceeding were an inconvenience, a formality they'd wrap up before brunch. But seated quietly on the opposite side of the courtroom was someone who seemed to belong to another world entirely. Her name was Patricia Reynolds, 58 years old, her frame small and delicate, a scarf tied gently around her head. It wasn't fashion. It was survival. Beneath that scarf was the story of a woman who had stared death in the face and chosen to fight. She was a breast cancer survivor, currently in remission, though her body still carried the scars, visible and invisible, of chemotherapy and radiation. Her hands trembled slightly as she dabbed a tissue under her tired eyes. Her blouse was plain, her slacks slightly wrinkled. To the world, she might have looked fragile. But beneath that quiet exterior was the kind of strength that could humble anyone, if only they cared to look. The courtroom was filled with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Some leaned toward each other, whispering softly, wondering what a Hollywood star's daughter could possibly be doing here. But as the clerk read out the charges, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and harassment, the whispers stopped. That's when people realized this wasn't about fame. This was about humanity. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, scanning the file with his usual calm grace. He'd seen thousands of faces in his courtroom, the arrogant, the broken, the desperate. But even he could feel the energy shift in the room. On one side sat youth, wealth, and privilege. On the other sat dignity, struggle, and pain. And the air between them, heavy, unspoken, carried something powerful: accountability. Willow crossed her legs, tapping her manicured nails on the table. Every gesture screamed impatience. Her gaze wandered to the ceiling, as if to say, "Can we get this over with?" Behind her, her lawyers organized files worth more than most people's monthly rent. Patricia sat quietly, her eyes fixed on her trembling hands. Each breath looked like it required courage. She wasn't there to seek revenge. She was there because she believed, maybe naively, that justice still existed somewhere in this world. Judge Caprio looked up. His voice, warm but steady, filled the room. "We are here to hear the case of the state of Rhode Island versus Willow Camille Rain Smith. Charges: assault, harassment, and emotional cruelty against one Patricia Reynolds. Are both parties ready to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor," the prosecutor replied. Willow's attorney rose. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. We believe this entire matter has been blown out of proportion by social media and misinterpreted by public opinion." A faint, dismissive smile tugged at the corner of Willow's lips. To her, this was still a game, a minor inconvenience, a PR hiccup her parents' team would smooth over by the weekend. But Judge Caprio's courtroom was not a movie set. It was a sanctuary for truth. And here, arrogance had no script. There's a certain kind of silence that feels different, the kind that's thick with judgment, heavy with expectation. The gallery leaned in, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Patricia looked up at Willow, not with anger, but with quiet disbelief. Maybe she was remembering that night, the one that had brought her here. Maybe she was still hearing the laughter that had cut deeper than any insult ever could. Because it wasn't just about a spilled glass of water. It was about the cruelty that came after. The prosecutor stood, her voice clear but controlled. Your Honor, on the night of May 16th, the defendant, Ms. Willow Smith, dined at the Capitol Grill restaurant in Providence, where the complainant, Mrs. Patricia Reynolds, was working as a server. What followed was an act of humiliation that went far beyond rudeness. It was an act of deliberate cruelty toward a woman battling cancer. The gallery shifted uneasily. A few people shook their heads. Some looked down, ashamed by the very thought of what they were about to hear. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward, his hands folded. Go on. Mrs. Reynolds, the prosecutor continued, was pouring water when her hand trembled slightly, a side effect of chemotherapy. Ms. Smith proceeded to mock her publicly, questioning whether she was drunk, and, upon learning she was a cancer survivor, made comments that are, frankly, unconscionable. Whispers rippled through the room. Even those who had come out of curiosity now sat straighter, their faces tightening in discomfort. But before any of them could fully process the gravity of what they'd just heard, Willow's attorney cut in, trying to shift the focus. With respect, Your Honor, he said smoothly, my client was expressing legitimate dissatisfaction with service. Any perceived insult is a matter of misunderstanding. The service industry. Judge Caprio raised a hand, silencing him. Counselor, I have no interest in spin. We will review evidence, not interpretation. He turned to Willow. Miss Smith, do you understand the charges against you? Willow shrugged lightly. Yeah, I do. But honestly, this is ridiculous. I complained about bad service. That's it. I didn't know anything about her condition. Now people are turning it into this big sob story because of who I am. Every head turned toward her. Her words hung in the air, sharp and cold. In the front row, Patricia blinked back tears. The judge's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in disappointment. The kind of disappointment that carried the weight of generations who had fought for respect, empathy, and kindness. Miss Smith, he said softly, you just referred to a cancer survivor's suffering as a sob story. Tell me, do you understand how deeply cruel that sounds? Willow rolled her eyes. People see my parents' names and think they can get money out of me. It happens all the time. I'm just being honest. The tension in the courtroom shifted from shock to quiet outrage. Even the bailiff's jaw clenched. But the moment that would truly change everything was still to come. And it would come like thunder after stillness. Judge Caprio, who had spent decades handling humanity's mistakes with compassion, had finally met a kind of arrogance that tested even his patience. He took a slow breath, exhaled, and then said something that silenced even the hum of the ceiling fans. Honesty is not cruelty, Miss Smith, and cruelty is not honesty. There's a difference you seem not to understand, but you will. The words hit the room like a quiet explosion. Patricia's eyes lifted. For the first time that morning, she allowed herself a faint, fragile smile, the kind that comes when truth finally begins to push back against injustice. And yet, what made this story extraordinary wasn't just the evidence that would follow. It was the transformation that would soon unfold in front of millions. The cameras were rolling. The world would see it all. The arrogance, the evidence, the judgment, and ultimately, the redemption. Because in that small Rhode Island courtroom, fame was about to meet accountability. And for once, the scales of justice were perfectly balanced. In the next section, the tension will deepen as the courtroom sees what really happened inside that restaurant. Through raw footage, live audio, and the tears of a woman who simply wanted to be treated with dignity. The story that had shocked the entire state began, like so many tragedies do, on an ordinary evening that should have been forgettable. It was a Thursday at the Capitol Grill in downtown Providence, a restaurant known for its quiet elegance, crystal glasses, and the soft hum of conversation that floated through the air like background music. The kind of place where birthdays were celebrated, deals were signed, and memories were quietly made. At table 7, under the warm amber glow of a chandelier, sat Willow Smith and two of her friends, young, wealthy, laughing too loudly for the room, their phones never leaving their hands. They were draped in the confidence of those who have never known the fear of a declined credit card or a late rent notice. For them, the world had always said yes. Across the room, Patricia Reynolds adjusted the small silk scarf around her head and inhaled deeply. The medication still left a metallic taste in her mouth. Her arms felt heavy, her body weak, but she needed this shift. Her insurance had barely covered her chemotherapy, and the unpaid bills sitting on her kitchen table didn't care that she was still healing. She approached table 7 with a practiced smile, pitcher of water in hand. Her fingers, thin and trembling from nerve damage, tightened around the handle. She had poured water thousands of times, but tonight, her hand betrayed her. A few drops spilled, scattering like tiny raindrops across the linen tablecloth. Willow looked down at the water as though she had been personally insulted. Her glossy lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "What's wrong with you?" she said, loud enough for the next table to hear. "Are you drunk?" The laughter that followed wasn't kind. Patricia's face flushed. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she whispered. "I've just finished a round of chemo. Sometimes my hands shake." Willow's eyebrows rose in theatrical surprise. Then she laughed, a cold, cutting laugh that bounced off the polished walls. "Chemo? Well, maybe you shouldn't be working if you're falling apart. You're making people uncomfortable. I don't want some sick person touching my food." Conversations at nearby tables died away. Forks paused midair. A single heartbeat of silence followed, a silence that carried more weight than words ever could. Patricia froze, her lips parting but no sound escaping. Every instinct told her to apologize again, to shrink smaller, to make herself invisible until the storm passed. But humiliation has a way of rooting you to the spot. Her throat tightened, eyes burning, tears threatening to spill though she tried desperately to hold them back. The manager, Thomas, heard the commotion and hurried over. His face shifted when he saw the famous guest. That careful restaurant smile appeared, the one that meant, "Please, let me fix this before it goes viral." "Miss Smith," he began gently, "I'm terribly sorry if there's been an issue. Patricia's had a difficult recovery recently, but she's one of our best employees." Willow cut him off. "Recovery? From what? Laziness?" She gave a small scoff and waved her manicured hand dismissively. "Look, I don't care what her sob story is. I just don't want her touching my food again. Bring someone who can actually do the job." Patricia's trembling hand gripped the pitcher tighter, the tendons visible beneath pale skin. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor. But Thomas placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Patricia, go get a towel. I'll handle this." Willow's voice rose again, sharper now. "No, she can stay and hear this. Maybe she'll learn something about professionalism." The words sliced through the room like glass. People at nearby tables exchanged uncomfortable glances. One elderly couple shook their heads in silent disgust. Yet no one spoke. Fame has a way of intimidating truth into silence. Patricia swallowed hard. "Miss Smith, I'm truly sorry," she whispered. "The chemo makes my hands." Willow interrupted with a bitter laugh. "Oh, please. Everyone's got an excuse these days. Maybe if you can't handle a simple task like pouring water, you should find another line of work. This is a high-end restaurant, not a charity." Something inside Patricia broke at that moment. Not her will, but her composure. Tears spilled freely now, rolling down cheeks that had weathered pain most could never imagine. The manager stepped forward, voice firmer this time. "Miss Smith, that's enough." But Willow wasn't finished. She reached for her glass, lifted it with an expression of theatrical annoyance, and flung the contents across the table. Water splashed over Patricia's blouse, soaking the fabric through to her skin. Gasps erupted around the room. For a moment, even Willow seemed startled by her own action. Then, as if doubling down, she tossed her hair and muttered, "Now maybe she'll take the hint." The sound of Patricia's quiet sobs filled the silence that followed. The restaurant stood frozen, every eye fixed on the scene that had just unfolded. The clatter of utensils stopped. Even the background music seemed to fade beneath the heavy quiet. Patricia stood still, water dripping down the front of her uniform, the white fabric clinging to her thin frame. She wasn't thinking of lawsuits or outrage. She was simply trying not to break apart in front of strangers. She whispered, "I'm sorry," though she had done nothing wrong. Thomas, the manager, quickly offered her a towel. "Go home, Patricia. Please." But Patricia shook her head. "I can't. I need the hours." The tremor in her voice carried a lifetime of pride, of a woman who'd worked through sickness, through exhaustion, through fear itself. She dabbed at her blouse with the towel, her face red with shame. Meanwhile, Willow sat back in her chair as if she had just performed a minor inconvenience, scrolling through her phone. "You know what?" she said, turning to her friends. "We're leaving. I'm not eating here. This whole place feels like a charity case now." Her friends giggled nervously, unsure whether to agree or to hide. They followed her out, designer handbags swinging, heels clicking, laughter trailing behind them like a cruel echo. Patricia watched them go, chest heaving. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was numb. The humiliation felt heavier than her exhaustion. Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'll file a report," he said quietly. "That behavior is unacceptable, even from a celebrity." But Patricia knew what usually happened when ordinary people stood against power. The famous apologized on camera. The internet raged for a week, and then the world moved on. Bills still came. Life still demanded strength. She gathered herself, took a deep breath, and finished her shift. When she finally got home that night, she sat at her kitchen table, still wearing her damp blouse. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of city traffic. She looked at her reflection in the window, at the scarf that hid her bald head, at the dark circles beneath her eyes. She whispered to herself, "Maybe she's right. Maybe I shouldn't be working." Then her phone buzzed. A message from her coworker read, "She posted about you." Patricia opened social media, and there it was. Willow Smith selfie, flawless and grinning, captioned with casual cruelty. "Worst service ever." Server literally shaking and crying. Maybe stick to jobs you can actually do. First world problems, service fail. The world tilted for a moment. Patricia stared at the screen, disbelief hardening into pain. Beneath the post were thousands of comments, some laughing, others cruelly echoing Willow's words. For the first time since her diagnosis, Patricia felt smaller than her illness. That night, Patricia barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that laughing face, heard that cruel voice echoing through the restaurant. The sting of cold water had long dried on her skin, but the humiliation lingered like a bruise that refused to fade. At 2 a.m, she sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the small wooden cross her late mother had given her. She whispered a prayer, not for revenge, but for peace. But peace didn't come. By dawn, the story had already exploded online. Someone from the restaurant, perhaps a customer, had uploaded phone footage of the incident. Within hours, it was everywhere. On Twitter, TikTok, and news blogs with headlines like "Willow Smith humiliates cancer survivor in restaurant meltdown." The internet had chosen its sides. Some excused her. She's young, she didn't know. Others were merciless. But for Patricia, the comments were knives either way. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from reporters, advocacy groups, even strangers offering donations. If she didn't want fame, she only wanted dignity. By noon, her manager called. "Patricia, Judge Caprio's office reached out. The Attorney General wants to press charges for assault and harassment. They need your statement." Patricia hesitated. She'd never been inside a courtroom except for jury duty, never imagined herself standing before cameras or facing lawyers in $1,000 suits. But she thought of every person who had ever been talked down to, mocked, or dismissed because they were sick, poor, or simply human. Maybe, she realized, this wasn't just about her. Maybe it was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. She agreed. Meanwhile, across Los Angeles, Willow woke to chaos of a different kind. Her phone pulsed with missed calls, her publicist's voice frantic. "Do not post anything. Don't say a word. We'll handle it." But arrogance has its own gravity. Willow grabbed her phone, opened Instagram stories, and typed, "People are too sensitive." It was bad service. Everyone's exaggerating. The backlash doubled instantly. Her comment section flooded. "You mocked a cancer survivor. Privilege at its ugliest. Your parents raised you better." By that evening, the Smith family's representatives had no choice but to issue a formal statement. "We are aware of the allegations involving Ms. Willow Smith and are cooperating fully with authorities." And so, less than 48 hours after that spilled glass of water, a courtroom summons was issued. In a city where fame often shields wrongdoing, this time the system moved swiftly. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters speculated about outcomes, about influence, about whether Judge Frank Caprio, the man known for compassion, would treat Hollywood's daughter like any other citizen. Inside that courtroom, two women would soon face each other again. One clothed in designer arrogance, the other in quiet courage. The world waited to see which one justice would choose. The courtroom doors opened with the familiar echo that Judge Frank Caprio had heard countless times in his career. But this morning, there was an electric charge in the air, an anticipation that something monumental was about to unfold. News crews lined the hallways outside. Microphones jutted through the doors like metal fingers trying to catch every word. And inside, the gallery was packed, faces drawn tight with curiosity and expectation. Willow Smith arrived first, her stride measured and deliberate. She wore designer clothes, flawless makeup, and a faint expression of boredom. Every move whispered, "I am untouchable." Behind her, her lawyers adjusted their suits and murmured strategies that would cost more than most people earn in a year. Across the courtroom, Patricia Reynolds sat quietly, her scarf still tied gently around her head. There was no pretense here, no effort to impress. Her blouse was simple, her hands still trembling slightly from the stress of the morning. And yet, in the calm strength of her gaze, there was something unmistakable: resilience. She had survived chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, months of uncertainty, and now she was here, ready to face the very person who had humiliated her. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and addressed the court. "We are here to review the charges of assault, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress against Ms. Willow Smith. We will begin with the presentation of evidence." Willow leaned back in her chair, a faint smirk on her face. She had seen footage before, yes, but Hollywood had trained her to believe that influence could bend reality. Yet the first piece of evidence that came onto the screen would immediately challenge that belief. The security footage from the Capitol grill flickered to life on the courtroom screen. The gallery leaned forward. Every frame was painfully clear. Patricia Reynolds approaching the table with a gentle smile, pouring water with care, her hand trembling ever so slightly. Willow's voice could be heard mocking her. "What's wrong with you? Are you drunk?" Her friends laughed, thinking it was merely banter. But the laughter echoed like thunder in the quiet restaurant. Patricia's eyes widened in shock, and she stammered out an apology. I'm recovering from chemotherapy. My hands sometimes shake." The footage paused. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Even Willow's own attorney shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Judge Caprio leaned forward. "Miss Smith, do you recognize this moment?" Willow's smirk faltered. "Yes, but—" The prosecutor, Jennifer Chun, raised a finger. "Your Honor, we request to proceed with Exhibit B, audio recordings captured by diners' phones." The statements Ms. Smith made verbally were just as damaging as her actions. They show clear intent to humiliate. The audio played. The words, cold and cutting, reverberated through the courtroom. "Maybe you shouldn't be working if you're falling apart. You're making people uncomfortable." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. For the first time that day, the veneer of arrogance cracked. Minnie Hook. The room was about to witness the moment even fame couldn't shield from accountability. Patricia sat straighter, though her hands trembled. She had lived through worse. Hospitals, chemotherapy, endless bills. Yet the emotional weight of being mocked in public pierced deeper than any treatment ever could. The courtroom remained silent, yet the tension was thick enough to feel in the air. Each person present seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. Even Willow's confidence, once so solid, had begun to tremble. Her fingers tapped nervously on the table, betraying a flicker of anxiety she had never allowed herself to show publicly. Judge Caprio's voice, calm but commanding, cut through the silence. "Miss Smith, what you have just heard and seen represents deliberate humiliation toward a woman fighting for her life. Do you understand the gravity of these actions?" Willow's eyes darted toward her lawyers, a silent plea for guidance. Her lips parted, ready to deliver the rehearsed defense, but the room wasn't listening to excuses anymore. Jennifer Chun, the prosecutor, clicked to the next exhibit. "Your Honor, Exhibit C. Eyewitness testimony and written statements from the restaurant staff. They observed Ms. Smith's actions and can confirm the sequence of events." The first witness took the stand, a young hostess named Emily. Her voice trembled slightly, but the words were clear. She mocked Patricia's shaking hands. She threw water across her chest. "I've never seen anyone treated that way, not even the most difficult customers." The gallery stirred. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Cameras captured every reaction, every flinch, every dropped jaw. Patrons, reporters, even court staff seemed to lean closer to the unfolding truth. Judge Caprio nodded and allowed the next statement. This time it was from Thomas, the manager. His voice carried a calm authority that only comes from witnessing injustice too many times. "Your Honor," the restaurant staff attempted to intervene. "I asked Ms. Smith to stop. I explained Patricia's condition, but she continued. She left the restaurant laughing, mocking the victim, and posted on social media the very same night, sharing the humiliation publicly." The courtroom gasped. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered quietly, struggling to comprehend that fame could so openly weaponize cruelty. Many hook, but the most damning evidence, the one that would leave even Willow's lawyers speechless, was yet to be revealed. The prosecutor advanced to the final exhibit, a social media post from Willow herself, complete with images, captions, and hashtags mocking Patricia's condition. The words jumped off the screen. "Worst service ever." Server literally shaking and crying. "Maybe stick to jobs you can actually do." "First world problems." A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, recording every second. Some audience members wiped tears from their eyes. Patricia's hand gripped the rail of her seat, her pulse racing as the magnitude of what had been done to her unfolded in undeniable detail. Judge Caprio's gaze never left Willow. "Miss Smith, this is not about minor mistakes. This is about intent to demean, publicly humiliate, and exploit someone else's suffering for personal amusement. How do you respond to this evidence?" Willow's voice faltered, faint now. I was frustrated at the service." The room collectively shifted, sensing that the carefully constructed facade of privilege was cracking. Willow's voice wavered. The confidence that had carried her into this courtroom like a queen now seemed brittle, fragile, like glass trembling on a ledge. She looked at Patricia, at the small, trembling hands, the scarf tied delicately around her head, the faint shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes, and something flickered in her expression. For the first time, she saw the real human being she had mocked, humiliated, and publicly shamed. But realization alone doesn't erase the weight of consequence. Judge Caprio, sensing the fragile moment, allowed a quiet pause. He then turned to the courtroom, his voice resonating. "Justice is not served by wealth or name. It is served by truth." The next witness was brought forward, a fellow diner who had recorded part of the incident on their phone. The video played again, this time with crystal clear audio, showing the precise sequence of events. The spilled water, Willow's mockery, her laughter, the cold smirk, and finally, the cruel caption she had posted online. Every movement, every word was undeniable. The audience leaned in. Some covered their mouths. Some shook their heads. The atmosphere was thick with disbelief and anger, but also anticipation. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Many hook, But then something happened that no one expected. Judge Caprio turned to Willow. "Miss Smith, the law is clear. Intentional humiliation and assault are punishable offenses. This isn't a game, and your fame will not shield you. Do you understand the seriousness of this moment?" Willow swallowed hard, her throat dry. For once, the rehearsed answers faltered. I didn't think." The prosecutor interjected. "Your Honor, the cumulative evidence shows not just negligence or frustration, but a clear pattern of cruelty. She targeted a woman battling cancer, exacerbated her humiliation by throwing water, and then amplified the act through social media for personal amusement." Patricia's eyes glistened, her breathing shallow. Every detail was replayed before the room. The injustice of the act, which had seemed surreal online, was now undeniable in person, magnified by the courtroom's weight and authority. Judge Caprio's gaze swept over Willow's team, then back to her. It is not enough to claim ignorance or frustration when your actions have caused pain to someone already fighting for her life. Accountability begins here in this room today. Even the lawyers looked tense now. There were no easy words. The evidence was irrefutable. The humiliation, the malicious intent, the public degradation, all laid bare, impossible to argue against. Minnie Hook, and a shocking moment that would finally tip the scales of justice, was about to arrive. A hush fell. Everyone sensed the pivot point, the moment when tension teetered on the edge between personal arrogance and moral reckoning. Cameras rolled. Hearts raced. Patricia's trembling hands gripped the rail, bracing for what seemed inevitable. The air in the courtroom was electric, every heartbeat amplified by the weight of the evidence. Willow Smith's smug expression had disappeared completely, replaced by a flicker of unease she had never allowed herself to feel in public. The videos, the audio, the social media posts, they all told the same story. Cruelty in full display, deliberate and unrepentant. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice calm but piercing. "Miss Smith, we are not here to discuss intent or perception alone. We are here to discuss consequences, actions that cause emotional and physical distress to someone already fighting for her life. How do you intend to address this?" Willow opened her mouth, but no words came. Her usual charm, her rehearsed lines, her attempts to turn sympathy into strategy, all failed under the undeniable truth. Her gaze flicked to Patricia, who sat quietly, unwavering despite the humiliation, her dignity intact even in the aftermath of public mockery. Minnie Hook, and then something happened that stunned everyone in the courtroom. Judge Caprio signaled to the prosecutor. Jennifer Chun brought forward the final exhibit, a compilation of all social media posts, public comments, and responses from viewers online. It was overwhelming. Millions of people had already seen Willow's posts. Some laughed, others were outraged, and a growing chorus called for justice. The court watched as screenshots, videos, and comments painted a picture too large for any spin to erase. The gallery murmured in disbelief. Some audience members whispered, "She can't get away with this." Others shook their heads, unable to process the level of cruelty captured on film. Judge Caprio's eyes met Willow's directly. This is the moment when actions meet accountability. It doesn't matter if you're young, famous, or wealthy. What matters is whether you have treated your fellow human being with dignity and respect. Do you understand that? Willow swallowed hard, her voice shaking for the first time. I didn't think it would. I didn't know it would." The judge's tone softened slightly, but his authority was unmistakable. Ignorance is not innocence. Thoughtless cruelty still carries consequences. Patricia's lips pressed together as tears threatened to fall. She had survived more than anyone could see, but this courtroom, the formal acknowledgement of her suffering, was both terrifying and cathartic. Every camera lens, every recorder, every notebook chronicled a simple truth. In this room, justice would not bow to fame. Minnie Hook, and at that exact moment, everyone realized the turning point had come, the point where arrogance could no longer survive the weight of truth. The tension was palpable. Lawyers fidgeted. Reporters scribbled furiously. The audience leaned forward, sensing the imminent tipping point. Patricia's trembling hands clenched the bench. Willow's face was pale, a reflection of her rapidly unraveling confidence. Judge Caprio's gavel rested before him, the silent promise of fairness ready to strike. Every eye was fixed on a moment when the courtroom would transition from evidence and argument into the breaking point, where emotion, justice, and morality collide. The courtroom had never felt heavier. Every witness had spoken. Every video had played. Every word of cruelty, every laugh, every mocking gesture had been laid bare before the judge, the audience, and, most importantly, the person it had targeted, Patricia Reynolds. Judge Frank Caprio, known for his gentle yet unyielding wisdom, surveyed the room. He had presided over thousands of cases, theft, disputes, minor assaults, even violent crimes. But rarely had he felt the gravity of human cruelty so sharply in a simple, everyday act, the cruelty of privilege wielded like a weapon against the vulnerable. Willow Smith sat in the defendant's chair, her posture stiff, her expression shifting from defiance to uncertainty. The veneer of confidence she had carried into the courtroom was now cracked, revealing a flicker of fear and regret. She had always believed that influence, name, and wealth could shield her from consequence. But here, in Judge Caprio's courtroom, reality had no exceptions. Judge Caprio cleared his throat, his voice calm but penetrating. "Miss Smith, you have been presented with evidence that is impossible to ignore. You publicly humiliated a woman who has survived cancer, a woman who has fought for her life while you mocked her. Your actions have caused deep emotional harm." Willow opened her mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "I will hear you, but first, I need to ensure you understand the weight of what has occurred." He turned toward Patricia. "Madam, I see your courage. I see the strength it takes to stand here after what you endured. Your dignity has remained intact, even in the face of cruelty that most would crumble beneath." Patricia's lips quivered. A single tear traced down her cheek, but her posture remained upright. The room seemed to hold its breath. Minnie Hook. And then, in a moment that would shock everyone watching, Judge Caprio did something completely unexpected. He looked back at Willow. "Miss Smith, the law is not designed to punish for humiliation alone. It is designed to teach lessons about accountability, empathy, and respect. Do you understand what you have done?" Willow's voice was small, shaky. I didn't realize. I wasn't trying to." Judge Caprio's eyes softened slightly, but his tone carried the weight of decades of experience. Intent is not always the measure of impact. You cannot undo the pain you caused, but you can learn from it. You can take responsibility. That is the true test of character. The courtroom seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the moment. Reporters, spectators, even Willow's lawyers leaned forward, sensing that a verdict, moral if not legal, was forming. The silence stretched. Patricia exhaled, holding on to her inner strength. Willow's fingers clenched the edge of the table. She had never felt the world look at her like this. Not as a star, not as a child of Hollywood royalty, but as a human being whose actions carried consequences beyond herself. Judge Caprio paused, letting the moment sink in. Then, with deliberate calm, he leaned forward, ready to deliver the first part of the lesson that would echo far beyond the walls of that small road island courtroom. Judge Caprio's gaze held Willow's, steady and unwavering. The silence in the courtroom was profound, filled with anticipation. Every eye was glued to the bench, every ear tuned to the weight of the words about to be spoken. "Miss Smith," he began, his voice firm yet compassionate, "the evidence is clear. The actions you took were not mistakes. They were deliberate, they were cruel, and they were broadcast to the world." The courtroom murmured. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even Willow's lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was no ordinary reprimand. This was a moral reckoning, delivered with a clarity that cut through privilege. Minnie Hook, but what came next would leave everyone in the courtroom, and millions watching online, speechless. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle. You had a choice. You could have shown kindness. You could have shown patience. Instead, you chose humiliation. And while money, influence, and fame can shield many from accountability, they cannot shield you from the truth of your actions. Willow's hands shook slightly, her usual composure shattered. She opened her mouth, as if to defend herself, but no words came. For the first time, she truly understood the magnitude of what she had done. Turning to Patricia, Judge Caprio's voice softened. "Madam, you have shown remarkable courage. You endured not just the illness that tried to take your body, but the cruelty that tried to take your dignity. You remind all of us why empathy, respect, and compassion are the foundations of our society. Your presence here today honors those values." Patricia's lips pressed together as tears ran silently down her cheeks. She had faced doctors, hospitals, and her own body's betrayal. But now, justice itself, human justice, recognized her suffering. Then Judge Caprio addressed Willow again. "It is in moments like this that we are tested, not by the public, not by cameras, not by fame, but by our own humanity. The court has the power to punish, yes, but more importantly, it has the power to teach. And the lesson here is simple. Your actions have consequences. Empathy cannot be optional. Respect is not negotiable. And accountability is not circumstantial." Minnie Hook, at that instant, even those who had doubted the courtroom's power felt the weight of truth settle over the room. Willow lowered her gaze. She saw the videos, the posts, the courtroom audience, but most importantly, she saw the human face of the person she had wronged, and the realization hit harder than any legal penalty ever could. Judge Caprio's words hung in the room like a solemn promise. Cruelty has limits, fame has limits, and morality, though often tested, will always hold the final authority. The moment had reached its peak. The courtroom held its collective breath, knowing that everything was about to change. Judge Caprio's gaze swept the courtroom, landing again on Willow. The silence was almost unbearable. Reporters leaned forward, cameras ready to capture every second. Every person present seemed to feel the same collective tension, the sense that history was unfolding in this quiet Rhode Island courtroom. "Miss Smith," the judge continued, "I will not allow fame or privilege to excuse cruelty. The law does not protect arrogance. It protects the vulnerable. And today, that protection must be felt in its fullest." Patricia's hands, still trembling slightly, rested on her lap. Her eyes were fixed on Willow. She had expected apologies, but nothing could prepare her for the weight of moral clarity that now filled the room. Minnie Hook. And then, in a moment that stunned even the most experienced courtroom observers, Judge Caprio issued the verdict that would change everything. "Therefore," Judge Caprio said, his voice unwavering, "this court finds that while Miss Smith's actions caused undeniable harm, the purpose of justice is not simply punishment, but education and reflection. Miss Smith, you are hereby required to perform community service at organizations that support cancer patients and survivors. Additionally, you will personally apologize to Patricia Reynolds in court in a manner that acknowledges the emotional harm inflicted and commits to understanding the value of empathy and respect." The courtroom gasped. Many whispered among themselves, "Justice, but in a way that teaches? Not just fines or legalese, but moral accountability?" Willow's face paled. Her lawyers whispered urgently, but the judge raised his hand. "Silence. This is not a negotiation. This is a lesson in humanity, one that you will not ignore, no matter your fame or fortune." Patricia blinked, overwhelmed. She had expected judgment, yes, but not a transformation. She had not anticipated that the court would turn what had been a humiliating moment into an opportunity for awareness, learning, and public accountability. Minnie Hook. Willow realized for the first time that her influence could no longer shield her from truth. Tears pricked the corners of Willow's eyes. The weight of her actions, mocking a cancer survivor, posting it online, laughing while others suffered, finally sank in. For the first time, she understood that her name, her money, her fame, all of it, did not erase her responsibility to treat others with dignity. Judge Caprio's tone softened, but carried absolute authority. It is in facing these moments that character is revealed. You have the opportunity to grow, to learn, and to repair. Do not squander it. Your actions will be remembered, not because of the humiliation you caused, but because of the understanding and empathy you now must demonstrate. The gallery sat in stunned silence. The lesson was clear. The breaking point had arrived, not with anger or retribution, but with undeniable moral clarity. The courtroom remained silent, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Willow Smith's usual composure had vanished entirely. She sat stiffly, head bowed, grappling with the reality that her privilege could not erase the suffering she had caused. Patricia Reynolds, seated across from her, finally allowed herself to exhale. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. She had waited years for recognition, for respect, for justice. Not vengeance, not spectacle, justice. And today, she was finally witnessing that truth unfold. Judge Caprio's voice resonated one final time. Miss Smith, the law often addresses actions, but justice addresses character. The measure of a person is not how they avoid mistakes, but how they respond when faced with their consequences. You now have the opportunity to grow, to repair, and to contribute positively to the lives you have affected. The words struck deep. Willow's fingers twitched nervously. The audience leaned forward, sensing a transformation in real time. She realized that no lawyer, no PR team, no social media post could rewrite what had already happened. All that remained was acceptance, humility, and accountability. And at that moment, the world seemed to pause, waiting to see what choice she would make. Willow lifted her head slowly, eyes meeting Patricia's. For the first time, there was no smirk, no deflection, no arrogance, only the weight of responsibility. She whispered, barely audible, "I am sorry." Patricia's eyes softened. There was no triumph in her gaze, only acknowledgement of the courage it took to finally face the consequences. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, though quivering with the remnants of the pain she had endured. Judge Caprio nodded. That acknowledgement, though small, is the beginning of repair. Let it guide your actions moving forward. Let it remind you, and everyone watching, that every human being deserves dignity, and every act of cruelty carries its consequences. The courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and spectators reflected quietly on the magnitude of what they had witnessed. This was not merely a legal lesson. It was a moral lesson, one that transcended fame, wealth, and social status. Patricia stood gracefully, adjusting her scarf. She had faced humiliation, public mockery, and emotional pain, but she walked out of the courtroom with her dignity intact, reinforced by a justice system willing to uphold humanity over celebrity. Willow remained seated a moment longer, absorbing the weight of the lesson. It was a breaking point, yes, but also the threshold of transformation. The world watched, millions of viewers witnessing an undeniable truth. Empathy, respect, and accountability cannot be bought or ignored. They must be lived. And in that quiet Rhode Island courtroom, justice had not only been served, it had taught, uplifted, and reminded every observer of what it truly means to be human. The courtroom was electric with anticipation. Every seat was filled, every camera lens trained on the bench, and every spectator waiting for the moment when justice would finally reach its conclusion. Weeks of evidence, testimony, and emotional upheaval had led to this precise instant. Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses and spoke, his voice calm, yet commanding. "We have reviewed the evidence, heard testimony from witnesses, and examined the impact of the actions on the victim. The law is clear, and so is justice." Patricia Reynolds sat quietly, hands clasped, her eyes reflecting both nerves and hope. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath for her as much as for the verdict. She had endured humiliation, public shaming, and emotional torment at the hands of someone who had thought fame excused cruelty. Now, finally, the scales of accountability were about to tip in her favor. And then, Judge Caprio's words cut through the room like a bell, commanding attention and respect. Miss Willow Smith, the judge continued, your actions have caused significant emotional distress to Ms. Reynolds, a woman battling a life-threatening illness. While the law can impose penalties, the greater responsibility lies in understanding the impact of your actions and learning from them. Willow, seated with her lawyers, nodded slowly, her head bowed. The usual aura of invincibility she had carried into the courtroom was gone. She felt the weight of the truth settle onto her shoulders. Judge Caprio leaned forward, voice firm. The court orders the following. Ms. Smith shall publicly apologize to Ms. Reynolds in writing and in person, acknowledging the emotional harm caused. Additionally, she will perform 100 hours of community service supporting organizations that assist cancer patients and survivors. She will also participate in educational programs on empathy, respect, and public accountability to ensure that this behavior is neither repeated nor normalized. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Cameras clicked, capturing the gravity of a judgment that balanced legal consequence with moral education. Patricia's lips quivered. She had expected fines, settlements, or apologies that rang hollow. But this was tangible justice, with real-life implications for the person who had wronged her. And then, something remarkable happened. Something no one expected in a courtroom. Not even Patricia. Judge Caprio addressed the entire courtroom. This judgment is not about punishment alone. It is about accountability, education, and the restoration of humanity. True justice requires understanding, reflection, and the willingness to repair the harm done. Let this serve as a reminder. Cruelty may be tempting, but compassion is eternal. Patricia's eyes welled with tears. She looked at Willow, who was now silently nodding. There were no smirks, no evasions, no arrogance, only acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Justice had not merely been served. It had been felt, experienced, and internalized. The gallery exhaled collectively. Even those who had been skeptical of the legal system were moved. This wasn't just a celebrity case. It was a story of courage, accountability, and humanity prevailing over privilege and arrogance. As Judge Caprio's words echoed through the courtroom, the reactions were immediate. Patricia's colleagues, seated quietly in the gallery, exchanged glances filled with relief and admiration. They had witnessed her struggle, her courage, and her silent endurance, and now they saw the court reflect the respect and dignity she deserved. Even the public watching via live streams could feel the weight of the moment. Comments flooded social media in real time. Finally, justice that teaches, not just punishes. A lesson in humanity that everyone needs to see. This courtroom just gave the world a masterclass in empathy. Millions were witnessing not just a verdict, but a moral reckoning. Willow Smith remained seated, head bowed, absorbing the full magnitude of the judgment. The usual defenses she had relied upon, wealth, fame, public influence, were powerless in the face of moral accountability. For the first time, she realized that real influence carried responsibility, not immunity. And then, Patricia did something that left the courtroom and viewers worldwide stunned. Judge Caprio gestured toward Patricia. Ms. Reynolds, would you like to address the court? Patricia stood slowly, her hands gripping the podium. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Your Honor, I never expected this. I never expected justice to feel like recognition, not punishment. What happened to me could have broken my spirit, but it didn't. This court has reminded everyone that dignity, respect, and empathy matter. Always. Thank you. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause. It wasn't just for the judgment, but for Patricia herself. The resilience, the courage, and the unwavering grace she displayed despite every insult and humiliation she had endured. Judge Caprio returned his gaze to Willow. Miss Smith, you will carry these lessons with you. Public apology, community service, and education are required, but the deeper requirement is reflection. You must leave this courtroom today not only aware of the harm you caused, but committed to preventing such actions in the future. Willow nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. She whispered softly, I understand. I will do better. The moment captured a truth that no social media post, no celebrity status, and no fame could ever change. Outside the courtroom, reporters documented the proceedings with intense focus. The story quickly went viral. Millions watched the narrative unfold. The rise of tension, the breaking point, and now the payoff. This was not just a celebrity scandal. It was a story that reminded the world that empathy and accountability are universal, and that justice can restore not only rights, but hearts. Judge Caprio's gavel struck lightly, signaling the formal end of proceedings, yet the emotional resonance lingered in the room, in the audience, and across the millions who watched the story unfold online. Outside the courtroom, reporters and camera crews scrambled to cover the story. Tweets, videos, and posts spread rapidly. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Patricia and hashtag Empathy Over Privilege began trending worldwide. Millions of viewers watched, sharing the story of accountability and courage. The incident had transformed from a viral act of cruelty into a viral lesson in morality. But the true impact wasn't just online. It was in the lives of those present in the courtroom. Patricia's friends and family, seated in the gallery, hugged each other quietly. The fear, anxiety, and frustration they had carried for days evaporated in the face of justice. They whispered to one another, marveling at how dignity had prevailed over humiliation and courage over fear. Willow remained seated, her expression unsteady. She had been confronted not just with legal consequences, but with the reality of the emotional devastation she had caused. Every word from the judge, every glance from Patricia had cut deeper than any social media backlash ever could. Judge Caprio's final instructions were solemn, yet filled with hope. "Let this case be a reminder," he said, addressing the courtroom and indirectly the millions watching online, that power, whether fame, wealth, or influence, must be exercised with responsibility, and that every human being deserves respect, dignity, and compassion. When we fail to honor these principles, the consequences are both moral and social. But when we embrace them, humanity is restored. And then something remarkable happened, something that would make this courtroom moment unforgettable for viewers everywhere. Willow finally rose, slowly approaching Patricia. The courtroom fell silent, every eye tracking the movement. Patricia's expression remained calm, poised, but her hands trembled slightly. Willow extended her hand, voice soft but steady. "I am truly sorry for everything I said and did. I understand now the impact of my actions, and I will do everything I can to make amends." Patricia looked at her, eyes meeting hers. For a moment, the room held its collective breath. Then she nodded, accepting the apology, not as a surrender, but as an act of closure, grace, and empowerment. The gallery erupted in muted applause. It was not a celebration of punishment, but a recognition of accountability, transformation, and moral courage. Cameras flashed, capturing a moment that would be replayed countless times across social media. Millions of viewers would witness this moment as a turning point, a reminder that justice can heal as well as correct. The courtroom settled into a hushed reverence. Patricia took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and quiet triumph. She had endured unimaginable stress, public humiliation, and the weight of illness. Yet here she was, her dignity unbroken, her courage acknowledged by both the law and the world watching. Willow stood beside her, visibly shaken but earnest. The transformation was subtle yet profound. A young woman learning the heavy cost of thoughtless actions and the profound value of accountability. The apology was more than words. It was a promise to change, a public acknowledgement of harm caused, and a first step toward redemption. Judge Caprio spoke once more, addressing both the courtroom and, indirectly, the millions of viewers following the story online. Justice is not measured solely by fines, sentences, or punishment. It is measured by the acknowledgement of harm, the willingness to learn, and the dedication to restore dignity where it has been broken. Today, that standard has been met. And in that moment, everyone realized the true power of accountability. Far beyond the courtroom walls, The gallery erupted in applause, restrained yet heartfelt. Spectators wiped tears, exchanged glances, and whispered quietly about the lesson they had just witnessed. This was a moment of societal reflection, a powerful reminder that empathy and respect are not optional, and that moral courage can triumph even over wealth, fame, and influence. Outside, news cameras recorded Patricia leaving the courthouse. Reporters scrambled for statements, but she remained composed, quietly acknowledging the support of her friends and family. Millions of viewers across the world followed every step, inspired not just by the verdict, but by the resilience, grace, and moral fortitude displayed. Willow lingered a moment longer, visibly changed. The weight of accountability settled upon her, and with it came the realization that influence carries responsibility, that words have power, and that true growth comes from facing the consequences of one's actions. The courtroom drama was over, but the lesson would resonate far beyond those walls. Judge Caprio's gavel struck gently, signaling the conclusion of the proceedings. Cameras flashed one final time, capturing the faces of two women forever linked by courage, accountability, and justice. One had endured, the other had learned. Together, they had transformed a moment of cruelty into a lasting lesson for the world. And so, the courtroom emptied, but the story did not end. Millions of viewers would carry the lesson forward. Empathy matters, accountability matters, and dignity, once lost, can always be restored when justice is tempered with humanity. The courtroom had emptied, but the energy lingered. Cameras no longer rolled. Reporters packed up their equipment, yet the resonance of the day's events lingered in every corner of the courthouse. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the steps in golden light, as if nature itself acknowledged the significance of what had transpired. Patricia Reynolds stepped onto the courthouse steps, her scarf still tied neatly around her head, her posture graceful and dignified. She had walked through the storm of humiliation, public scrutiny, and emotional pain, and now she walked into the quiet satisfaction of moral victory. Her eyes, bright and determined, reflected more than relief. They reflected triumph, not over another person, but over the injustices life had forced upon her. And in that moment, millions watching online felt a profound shift, an emotional ripple that spread far beyond the courtroom. Willow Smith emerged shortly after, her steps hesitant, her head bowed in quiet reflection. The young celebrity had faced a truth that wealth, fame, and influence could never obscure: the human cost of thoughtless cruelty. She approached Patricia cautiously, extending her hand, not as a gesture of superiority, but as an acknowledgement of shared humanity. "I'm truly sorry," Willow whispered. "I understand now, and I will work to make amends." Patricia met her gaze. She could have rejected the apology, she could have walked away coldly, but she chose compassion instead. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "What matters is that we learn, that we grow, and that no one else experiences the pain unnecessarily." The gesture was small, yet monumental. Cameras captured the moment. Social media exploded with comments praising both women. Courage and accountability in the same frame. This is how humanity wins. A lesson we all needed to see. Millions were inspired, sharing the story, reflecting, and rethinking how they treated others in their own lives. Judge Caprio's words echoed in their minds. Justice is not only about punishment. It is about learning, empathy, and restoration. Patricia and Willow walked down the courthouse steps together, a quiet but powerful image of reconciliation. It wasn't about winners or losers, but about the triumph of dignity and empathy over cruelty and arrogance. And then, as they disappeared into the crowd, something incredible happened that no one expected. A small group of cancer survivors waiting nearby approached Patricia. They hugged her, whispered thanks, and shared stories of their own struggles. For them, her courage had become a symbol, a reminder that even in the face of humiliation and hardship, strength, grace, and moral victory are possible. Willow watched silently, absorbing the lesson. This wasn't about fame anymore. It was about humanity. She realized that influence came with responsibility, that empathy wasn't optional, and that true growth required facing one's mistakes fully and honestly. The story of that day began to ripple far beyond the courthouse steps. Social media platforms were flooded with messages praising Patricia's courage and Willow's willingness to confront her mistakes. Millions had witnessed the transformation, a young celebrity learning humility, a survivor reclaiming her dignity, and a judge reminding the world that justice carries a moral dimension that no money or fame can overshadow. And yet, the most powerful lesson wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the hearts of those watching. Viewers from all walks of life shared their own experiences, stories of humiliation, moments of courage, and times when empathy had made all the difference. Families discussed the importance of kindness. Friends reflected on accountability. Even those who had never faced public scrutiny felt moved to consider how they treated the people around them. Patricia, meanwhile, became more than just a survivor. She became a symbol. Interviews, articles, and social media posts highlighted her unwavering dignity, her resilience, and her capacity for compassion even when confronted with cruelty. Millions were inspired not by her illness, nor by the humiliation she endured, but by the way she rose above it all with integrity. Willow, too, began to transform. Away from the cameras, she engaged in community service, volunteering at cancer support centers, and sharing her experience candidly with young fans. She spoke openly about the consequences of thoughtless actions, the power of apology, and the importance of empathy. Slowly, the public witnessed a young woman who had learned a hard but invaluable lesson. True influence is measured by the good you do, not the attention you command. And then something remarkable happened, something that turned this story from a courtroom drama into a worldwide moral lesson. Schools, advocacy groups, and online communities began using the incident as a teaching moment. Lessons on empathy, accountability, and respect for others were circulated widely. Children and adults alike were reminded that fame does not excuse cruelty and that every action has consequences, visible or hidden. Patricia and Willow's story became more than a news headline. It became a cultural touchstone. It reminded millions that even in a modern world of viral videos and online outrage, humanity, dignity, and moral courage still mattered most. Judge Caprio's wisdom echoed in every retelling. Justice is not solely punitive. It is restorative, educational, and deeply human. And for the millions who had followed the story, this truth resonated far beyond the courtroom. Patricia and Willow's paths had crossed under the worst circumstances, yet their encounter ended with an invaluable lesson. Empathy and accountability can transform even the darkest moments into opportunities for growth and understanding. Days turned into weeks, and the story of the courtroom spread further than anyone could have imagined. Millions had seen the incident unfold. The humiliation, the breaking point, the moral reckoning, and the ultimate resolution. But beyond the headlines, beyond the viral videos, the story began to settle quietly in hearts across the globe. People wrote letters, shared personal experiences, and reflected on how small acts of cruelty could leave lasting scars. Families discussed the importance of teaching empathy from an early age. Teachers incorporated the story into classroom discussions, asking students to consider how their words and actions might affect others. And in the midst of this global reflection, Patricia's quiet strength became a beacon for millions. Patricia, who had once feared her voice would be drowned out by fame and arrogance, now realized the profound reach of courage. By standing tall, by demanding justice with grace, she had not only reclaimed her dignity, but also inspired others to confront injustice in their own lives. Her experience became a testament. Strength is not measured by physical power or social influence, but by the ability to endure suffering and emerge with compassion intact. Willow, too, embraced transformation. She spoke openly about her mistakes, acknowledging publicly that her actions had caused harm and vowing to act differently in the future. Her journey became a reminder that accountability is not just about following rules. It is about confronting one's own failings honestly, learning from them, and taking action to make amends. And then, the full impact of the story became clear. It wasn't just a courtroom drama anymore. It was a universal lesson in humanity. Communities worldwide began sharing the story as an example of the profound difference empathy can make. Online forums, educational programs, and support groups highlighted the narrative, emphasizing that no one is beyond accountability and no act of kindness is too small. Millions internalized the lesson. Every action, every word, and every choice carries weight. Judge Caprio's approach became a model for justice, measured, compassionate, and deeply human. He had demonstrated that punishment alone is not enough, that true justice includes reflection, education, and the opportunity for personal growth. Patricia and Willow's paths had converged under the most difficult circumstances, yet both emerged changed. One had reclaimed dignity, the other had learned humility. And together, they had transformed a viral incident of cruelty into a worldwide lesson in moral courage, empathy, and accountability. Weeks after the courtroom drama, the lessons of that day continued to echo. Social media feeds were filled with reflections. Schools taught empathy through the story, and countless individuals began examining their own behavior. Patricia Reynolds and Willow Smith had become symbols, not of conflict, but of transformation, accountability, and the enduring power of human dignity. And in that moment, millions realized the story was no longer about celebrities. It was about humanity. Patricia, once a quiet, unassuming woman facing personal battles, had shown the world what courage looks like. Her calm, unwavering presence in the courtroom and her ability to accept an apology with grace transformed her into a figure of inspiration. People from every corner of the globe saw that strength is not about winning arguments or asserting dominance. It is about maintaining integrity, even when life seems unfair. Willow, meanwhile, faced the weight of her own mistakes. For the first time, she understood that fame and influence carried responsibility. Her public apology, community service, and dedication to learning empathy were not just legal obligations. They were steps toward becoming a better human being. Millions witnessed the moment a young woman realized that accountability is a bridge from arrogance to growth, and that no privilege can shield one from the consequences of their actions. And then the final lesson became crystal clear, one that every viewer could carry into their own life. Judge Caprio's words remained etched in minds worldwide. Justice is not only about punishment. It is about understanding, learning, and restoring dignity. The true measure of character is how we respond when confronted with our own mistakes. The story concluded not with anger or revenge, but with reflection, reconciliation, and hope. Patricia and Willow parted ways, each transformed in her own way, yet forever linked by the events that had taught the world that empathy, accountability, and moral courage are far more powerful than fame, cruelty, or ignorance. Millions of viewers shared the story, not merely as entertainment, but as a reminder that every action matters, every word carries weight, and every individual has the power to choose compassion over cruelty. The viral headlines faded, but the moral resonance lingered, a lesson in human dignity that transcended age, fame, and circumstance. And in the quiet aftermath, both women walked forward, changed yet stronger. One had reclaimed her dignity. The other had learned humility. Together, they had turned a moment of cruelty into a timeless lesson in empathy, justice, and the enduring power of humanity.